So when we tried the process of doing it with the Dallas Volunteer Attorney Project, we found that we don't have any way of tracking those cases and knowing whether or not there would be buy-in or whether anyone's doing it. The only thing I've heard back is that people are reading that italicized thing and going, oh, maybe that's kind of a law I'd like to practice. I think I'll go get some training, which is, I guess, a good byproduct. But also, we tried another approach, two side approaches on this. We went to a nonprofit organization that provides legal services to the poor, called the Central Dallas Ministries. And we trained their staff, and the Salesmanship Club, which has mental health professionals, we trained staff from their organization so that when they take a pro bono case in, they can do the case collaboratively, and then we, practice groups locally, provide the other attorney if they're interested. We've only had a few takers on that, and we've even had, in one situation, the client signed up for the process, and the next day the lady changed her mind and terminated it immediately. So we're finding barriers in the low socioeconomic basis cases that are somehow keeping cases from entering the process that are not because there's not an opportunity to. Then we went, my partner, Ulysses Reeves Waters, and I wrote an article for the ICP called Penetrating the, it's about penetrating the walls or the barriers of the collaborative process for vulnerable groups, other groups. And in that article, we identified a number of problems. One is that you find a lot of minority members are in the lower socioeconomic groups, and there is a dearth of people who are the professionals in this business from their communities. And that prompted us to feel that we needed to start training more people. Now, very early on, I had done a half-day orientation workshop through the Dallas Bar, in which we invited all the Minority Bar Association members. And we have a Hispanic Bar Association, an African American Bar Association, and an Asian Bar Association. We invited all these people. And they came, and we invited speakers from their communities who had collaborative training or were involved already. And what we found is that there still was very little business happening in those communities. I mean, I've had some cases with, as a result of connections I've made in that community, but really the cases were not happening there. And I guess we realized there are some barriers in terms of the professionals themselves wanting to decide whether or not it's worth the risk to branch out into a practice like this that may not be as secure as a more traditional practice is. And there is the barrier of realizing that the clientele often have very limited resources, and though they may be able to hire an attorney, if they hired an attorney and the case did not complete, then would they be able to hire a second attorney? Those fears were in place as well. So we still thought that we needed to train more from the minority communities, and we realized that one place to do that might be through the churches and religious communities. So we started with a group that was very supportive in the African American faith communities, where several different churches, one that was particularly interested in leading the project, we invited a number of people from the African American bar and from mental health professionals and financial professionals, and had a training for that group, hoping that it will eventually form its own practice group, just like they have a bar association. Have a practice group that focuses on the special interests and special concerns of their faith communities. All these are so in their infancy stage. And then the one that is the most in its infancy is the Child Protective Services project that I'm sure if anyone wanted to know more about it and all that you could know about it, you would be looking at Leora Oluwanishoma's videotape that has been done for Cutting Edge Law. Because Leora was the one who envisioned always that there was some other and better way to do child protective services than traditional litigation. I'll have to rewind a bit there because in my mediation years, I had become interested in child protective services mediation. And that goes back because I was a child protective services caseworker before I was a lawyer. And so I had gone and gotten the training on how to mediate a CPS case that originated with Mr. Firestone out of Florida, and became a mediator in Texas. And through the SMU program, they have a dispute resolution graduate program, I did some training for about 90 other mediators in Texas so that they could become capable of handling child protective services mediations. And for a while, I did a lot of those. I probably mediated over 50 of the CPS cases, but then there became enough people doing it, and people who really were practicing in that area and seen in what we have are what we call juvenile courts, or they're a subset of the family. There's family district courts and juvenile district courts, and the juvenile district courts handle these CPS cases by and large. And there's a whole group of people who mainly practice in that area. So they have now mediators that they use there. Well, Leora was one of the ones who not only practiced in CPS work, but was very frequently a participant in mediations, many of which I had mediated. And during those times, we would talk about, why wouldn't collaborative work for these people? And she kept mentioning that, talking to one of the juvenile district court judges about it. Ultimately, it meant that she was willing. Well, it was one of these very interesting connections. A woman that I go to church with, went to law school with her over 30 years ago, and her husband. She kept having a passion for seeing that we branch out and offer collaborative to this community, because she was handling the appeals of the parents. And what she was seeing when she would appeal their cases was that, oh my goodness, if they had had early advocacy, helping them negotiate a very complex for them parent safety service plan or parenting plan, that they might have been successful. But now they've lost their kids and they're having to appeal. So she wanted to see what she would call it, like the court-appointed special advocate for parents instead of for children, as an adjunct to the CASA kind of programs for children. Her name is Jan Fletcher. And so I said, you know what, I've heard you talk about this, and I've heard Leora talk about this. Let me just get the two of you together and you guys talk. And so I had them come to lunch one day at my house, and they talked. And it was like, oh, they could see how this could work, and the two of them could get this all figured out. What I did is help them with the administration of it, because if there's anything that I have sort of a little bit of a gift for, it's administering things. So then I began to kind of say, this is what you'll have to do first, and then this is what we'll do next, and we'll do this. And ultimately it meant we had a training. First we trained CPS caseworkers, and then we trained lawyers who would volunteer to be the collaborative advocates and in CPS cases, and the mental health professionals who would be involved in those cases as well, and mediators. And we're now at the beginning of that project being ready. Well, it's been launched, but we're waiting for our first cases. I think that when it takes off, it may be a model for use elsewhere. So I'm very excited that just as I was involved in, at least in Texas, with moving mediation into the CPS world, where now almost all their cases are resolved in mediation, I can see where I might have an impact on helping get collaborative into the CPS world. I would hope that that happens.